In the last 15 years or so, I have changed more in my own understanding of faith and church than I had my life cumulative up until that point. As you know, the church is in dramatic time of change. The culture is in a dramatic time of change. We're in the midst of arguably the third largest significant change in communication in human history. And the first would be the invention of writing, and the second would be the invention of movable type. We're in the midst of the internet age now and are not clear about the consequences of that. It's too early to tell. But the church is in a significant change, and I've experienced some conversion in the midst of that as well. Rod Kalojay was on the plane with some buddies. They were coming to Myrtle Beach for a golf outing. Myrtle Beach has more golf courses than people, and so they were coming there for a golf outing, and he said that when that plane hit those birds that it was just quiet. And he said he had two thoughts. He said the first thought was, I'm going to be dead in 90 seconds. And the second thought was, I hope I have done what I was supposed to with my life. Now, that's not the bucket list question. It's not, I hope I got to do everything I wanted to do. It was a faith question. I hope I did what I was supposed to with my life. I think part of what I've recognized is there's some aspects of Christian faith that I just missed. So when our kids were small, we moved from Columbia, South Carolina. We moved to Jacksonville, Florida. And if you've ever moved, you know that when you go to a new community, there are just new things about that community that you learn. And one of the things that existed in our Jacksonville neighborhood that had not been present in South Carolina was we had an ice cream truck. One of those trucks that somebody finds an old broken down truck and puts ice cream decals on the side and a little horn on the top of it that plays It's a Small World or something forever and ever and ever goes on. And it drives through and all the kids come. So the ice cream truck came down our street, and my son said, Dad, what's that? So I didn't plan this. I mean, I don't know exactly why I said this, but it just kind of came out. I said, son, that's a music truck. And he said, why is that? I said, well, it's true. It never comes through on mute. It's playing music all the time, right? And so he said, why is that? I said, well, I think people in Florida just know how much children love music. And he said, this is a great place to live. And I said, yes, it is. That lasted 3 days. And the truck stopped at the end of the driveway and all the kids came out. And Nathan went to the music truck and he came back and he said, Dad, you are not going to believe this. He said, Dad, but the music truck has ice cream. He said, I think it's been there all along. So Here's the thing that I didn't pay as close attention to. When it comes to the theology of Jesus, I don't know a lot. I don't know a lot of his theology. But when it comes to how he treated other people, I know a lot about that. And one of the things I've noticed is we have unintentionally suggested that being disciples of Jesus Christ is primarily an intellectual exercise. It's about what we think about Jesus. We want to get our doctrine right. It's about what we think about Jesus. But I want to suggest it's more than that. When I was ordained, I was asked, do I trust in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior? The ordination vow is not, do I believe in Jesus Christ, but do I trust in Jesus Christ? So Bill Carl, a Greek New Testament scholar, if I'm wrong about this, he can correct after I've left town. But the Greek word for belief is, the verb is pisteuo, the noun is pistis, and it can be translated belief, but a better translation is trust. And trust is different than belief in this way. Trust shows up in choice. If you trust something, it influences the choices that you make. You can believe forgiveness is a good thing. But unless you trust it, it's going to be hard to actually forgive. So when we moved to Kansas City, we all of a sudden were close to parts of the country that we didn't know people could get close to. And so we took a trip west, and part of that is we went to the Grand Canyon. How many of you have been to the Grand Canyon? Yeah. So I had never been. It was just stunning, as you know. It just blew me away to stand there and look at the Grand Canyon. But the other thing that just stunned me, there are no guardrails. There's no, you can just walk up to the edge and look hundreds of feet down. You can hang your toes off the edge if you are the type. And turns out I'm not the type. When I started looking down, I started noticing the cracks in the rocks over here, and I started backing up. And the reason I reacted to that, I have a very high confidence in gravity. I pistis gravity, all right? I trust it. I don't understand it. I don't know how it works, but the choices of my life are influenced by my confidence in gravity. When a scribe came to Jesus and said, "What's the greatest commandment?" Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all that you are, everything you are, and love your neighbor as yourself." It's noteworthy that Jesus did not give the scribe a copy of the Apostles' Creed. He did not say, "I want you to think this." He said, "I want you to love your neighbor as yourself, and love God with all that you are." That's a relational category. I think for the longest time, I thought being a disciple of Jesus Christ was primarily about getting my doctrine right. I like that, actually. I like to think about these things. I find it satisfying. I find it energizing. But I don't think that the primary thing about being a disciple of Jesus Christ is getting my thoughts right. You know, what's life about? He said it's about how you are with others. And I was in this college, and I got a job in a church in a small town outside of Clinton, all right? Clinton was the big city compared to Lawrence. And I got a job at the New Prospect Baptist Church south of Lawrence. Nothing before or since has equipped me for being the choir director at the New Prospect Baptist Church in Lawrence. They clearly did not have a high bar for choral music at New Prospect. And so I was there, and it was there that I was introduced to this language. People would talk about their conversion, and they would talk about it this way. They would say, Jesus came into their heart. That was the metaphor. Jesus came into their heart. Just as an aside, I love these people. And I actually went to the pastor, Pastor Jim, and said, "You know, I'm going to be here join the church every Sunday." Nobody does. I thought maybe I would come down at the end. And he said, no, you can't. And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, because you'd have to be immersed." I said, "No, I won't. I've been baptized already." He said, no. In the Baptist church, that little sprinkle thing, that doesn't count. You have to be immersed. I am the only person in the history of Christendom that has been rejected by the Southern Baptists when I was trying to get in, all right? And so those people, they would talk about Jesus coming into their hearts, right? I'm Presbyterian. we sort of assume Jesus enters head first, right? We're a little more academic. That's our comfort zone. Both of those, I think, are too small. I think when Jesus comes into our life, he comes into our relationships. He occupies the space between us. To talk about Jesus coming into my heart, to talk about Jesus coming into my head, is to imply that it can be me and just me with Jesus, all right? Now, my job as a visiting preacher is to offend no one, but I'm going to offend you mightily right here. It's a warning. I'm going to offend you mightily right. You know that hymn, In the Garden? And he walks with me and he talks with me. He tells me I'm his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. You know the best thing about that garden? There ain't nobody else in it. It's just me and Jesus, and I don't have to put up with all those other people, all right? I think what Jesus tells the scribes is sometimes you got to go with the Christians you got, all right? Jesus shows up in our relationships, not just in my heart, not just in my head. And so the essence of being a disciple is less what we think, although I'm not saying that's unimportant, but it's more how we are with one another. What we think exists to serve the way we treat one another. And so that means that the church, as I'm understanding it today, and I told you I'm in a time of conversion, so next week you might have gotten a whole different lecture. But the church, as I'm understanding it today, is not primarily a collection of doctrine. We're not a list of mission efforts. The church is primarily a network of relationships where we try to be bound to one another, not because of shared thought, but because we know that Christ has called us to love one another as best we are able. Just a little Bible study. I left my Bible at the hotel, but I remember this part. Paul talks about in the second chapter of Philippians, he talks this remarkable thing. He talks about, make my joy complete, he says, be of the same mind. Be of the same mind, he says. I read that for the longest time, and I thought that what Paul meant by that was think the same things, all right? Think the same things. Think alike. Get your doctrine aligned. But if you read everything around that, and first of all, the Greek actually doesn't mean mind. It's more mindset or orientation. And if you read what's around that, he says, regard others as better than yourself. Walk in a spirit of humility. And then he talks about Jesus, and he says, Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped or exploited, but emptied himself, humbled himself, even to the point of becoming a servant, dying on a cross. The mindset that Paul is referring to when he says, be of the same mind, the orientation that he's talking about is one of humility. It's one of humility. And here's the way I've been thinking. I think I had humility wrong for a long time. And I did this because I'm Southern, all right? So I'm with my people here, all right? And so I was taught, don't think too highly of yourself, Tommy. Don't draw attention to yourself. Nobody likes somebody who thinks too highly of themselves. That's what it is to be humble. It's a perspective of the self. It's like that old story that they found this guy in church who they deemed was the most humble man of the church, and they gave him a pen. Said he's the most humble man in the church, and then they took it away from him because he wore it. And so the thing is, you're not supposed to think too highly of yourself. I think that is the wrong understanding of humility. I'm not sure humility has anything to do with how you think about yourself. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't encourage you to think less of yourself. I don't think there's anywhere in the teaching of Jesus that encourages you to think less of yourself. I'm just not sure humility is one of those virtues you can catch head on. I think humility is a virtue that results based on how you see others. Tell you this story and then I'll quit and take questions. I was ninth grade and living in Atlanta, big Braves fan. And my dad came in one night and he said, Tom, don't go to sleep. I want you to be able to talk with Johnny when he gets here. And this is 10:30 at night. And so I'm thinking, okay, who's coming to visit us after 10:30 at night? I said, Johnny who? He said, Johnny Oates. I said, sure, Dad, sure. Johnny Oates was, in 1973, 1974, the catcher for the Atlanta Braves. And he went on later to be a manager, and Johnny Oates, so in 1973, you didn't make quite as much money as a professional baseball player as you do now. And so Johnny and Gloria and Lori, their daughter, they lived in an apartment in Atlanta, and they decided Atlanta only had about 20 games over the August, September months. And so John asked if he could stay in our basement for those 20 games, and Lori and Gloria were going to go back to Petersburg, Virginia, where they lived. So if you're connecting the dots here, I had a major league ball player staying in my basement when I'm in ninth grade. The second coming of Jesus is anticlimactic to that, all right? That in ninth grade, there's nothing that tops that. Sure enough, about 11:30, this sports car pulls into our plain suburban driveway, and he gets out. There's no uniform, there's no cleats, there's no catcher's mask, there's no catcher's mitt. There's absolutely nothing to let my neighbors know there's a major league ball player in my driveway. But he comes in and we have pie and we talk about baseball, about what it was like to catch Phil Necro and what it was like to be on the team with Hank Aaron and talk about baseball. And it was magical. And then my dad turned into my dad and he said, you know, John, Tom and Joe Barnes had a pretty good double play on the church league softball team last week. And I'm like, Dad, oh, for goodness sake, stop it, Dad. Now, a double play, it's pretty, actually, if you'd like to hear about it, I can tell. No, anybody else, I would have loved to talk, but not with him. Why is that? Because I saw something significant in our neighbor. When we see what God sees, or at least look for it, in what God sees in another, humility is the byproduct that just results. It's not humiliation. It's not thinking less of yourself. It's not thinking about yourself at all. It's recognizing the holy. And I think that's what Jesus means when he shows up in our relationships. And so Christianity is about trusting Jesus with our choices, with our relationships, with our purpose. And I think, to quote Rod Kaloje, that's what we're supposed to do with our life. So let me just stop with that and see if you have questions. Phil Donahue here will take your questions.
If we can't hear you, we will give you a mic and everything. So first of all, I just want to say, even though you didn't take Greek from me, you got all the Greek right. I just want to go ahead and say that. Way to go, Tom. Good job. I also want to say, this guy is so humble. He hasn't once, since he got here, bragged about the Kansas City team winning the Super Bowl. He's happy about it, but he hasn't bragged about it. So who's got a question that you'd like to ask our Focus on Faith preacher lecturer? Someone has a question, I'm sure. Okay, way back here. You're loud. Go ahead, Ann. Really loud.
The second part of love your neighbor is who is my neighbor. Would you just comment on that? Because I think that's a major problem we have today.
Great question. So the question, in case you didn't hear it all the way back over here, who is my neighbor? The question was, who qualifies to be my neighbor? So that passage, if you remember that, guy comes and says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus says, what do you read? He knows his Bible. He gets the law just right. Love your neighbor as yourself. And he says, okay, but who's my neighbor? So here's the premise behind the question. There are a lot of folks out there. Which ones of those folks qualifies to be not just an other, but my neighbor? How do I know of all the people, which ones out there I'm supposed to love? So Jesus, you see the question. So Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. And then at the end, Jesus asks a question. Anybody remember the question Jesus asked? Which one was the neighbor? He inverts the question. The scribe says, I'm looking at all those people out there and I can't figure out which ones of you deserve to be my neighbor. Is it because of your need? Is it because of your team? Is it because of what, he's trying to figure out the qualifications of you all. And Jesus says, that's not how neighbor works. Which one was the neighbor? Neighborly starts with you. Which one was the neighbor? Neighbor starts in us. And so it's not about them at all. It's about us. It's the same conversation about humility. It starts with us. So great question. Thank you for that. Yes, sir.
I don't hear too much about this, but where does the Holy Spirit fit in relationship with Jesus?
Where does the Holy Spirit fit in? There are lots of ways to talk about that, and I think for me, in my own understanding, I don't know how to separate and parse all that out. As a matter of fact, I'm less interested in parsing all of that out. I do know, I don't know. This is my sense that when it comes to the Trinity, most people connect to one person of the Trinity kind of first and reach for the others. There are people who are very comfortable talking about God, but if you start talking about Jesus, they get a little queasy. And there are Holy Spirit people who reach for kind of the others. I think that's kind of the way we are, maybe not. But one way to talk about the Spirit is the Spirit empowers the church to look like Jesus. That's part of what I'm saying in the sermon. If you haven't heard it, that wasn't enough to skip. Okay, you should still come. But the Spirit is what allows us to be more Christ-like, I think, makes us new in that kind of way, and is constantly doing that. But after that, I'm over my head. Yeah, great question. Yes?
What happens if, I think any of us who are honest with ourselves would say that we fail every day to become the people that we are meant to be, every day, every hour, every second. So what do we do with the hurt and the inadequacy we feel?
Trust when you go to worship and somebody up front says, in Jesus Christ you are forgiven. Trust that has your name on it. That's not just rote. Some weeks we're aware of our need for that more than others, but that is always the story of this. But yes, I get it. I'd been in Kansas City not very long, and I was driving somewhere, I don't remember where, and I passed an Ace hardware store. And I was kind of running late because that's my custom. But I needed some bungee cords. And so I thought, I'll stop at Ace and I'll get the bungee cord. So I went in, and I'm pushing time a little bit, but I went in, I found what I was looking for. I went up to the register, and when I waited in line, and when I got it was my turn, the woman behind the register, she said, "Oh my, this package is torn. You don't have all the cords that you're paying for. You should go get another one." Okay. So I go back, I found another one, package intact. I go, wait in line again. I go up to the register, and the barcode on the package was smudged. She couldn't get the price. I said, "It's $12.99. She says, I can't, yes, it's $12.99. She said, no, I gotta scan it. So you better get another one. Okay. So I go back, and I get a third package of money. The package is intact, a pristine barcode. I go up, she scans it, and I'm thinking, free at last, thank God Almighty, and free, and then the little paper in the machine that gives you a receipt, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've got to change the paper. This will just take a minute." She was a bit optimistic about that. And so then she got the paper changed, and she handed me my receipt. And then with a big smile, she said, "Have a nice day." And the record should have said, "See you Sunday." You go to Village, do you? Yes. I wish I had put that together before, right? So I'm not always the most patient guy. This is part of what I'm relating to. I'm not always the most patient guy. And I know that, and it showed there in Ace Hardware. And I know that, like Paul, so I suppose I could have, in my marriage vows, I could have said, I promise to be loving, but I know love involves patience, and sometimes I'm not always. There was this time in Ace Hardware, and it didn't go well, and maybe should we just asterisk on the patient? I suppose I could have said that. But we don't. The way to address the hypocrisy in us, the gap between us and Jesus, is not to reduce the call of Christ to something that is more manageable for us. It's to lean into the boldness. Jesus is the one. Jesus is the one who said, "You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. You can turn the second cheek. You can go the second mile." Jesus believed the church could be that people. We know we're most often not. But the way to address that is not ultimately to go to Jesus and say, "You didn't really know us. You thought we were A students. I actually am a C- student. I can't." Lean into the bold call, and then come. And when they say, "In Jesus Christ you are forgiven," trust that. Trust that. Yes, sir. The question was, Jesus said to love God with all that we are, but with neighbor, to love neighbor as ourself. And the question was, what's the distinction? That's a good question. I don't know that I have a good response to that. Kind of off the top of my head, Jesus is pretty clear that your neighbor is not God. So your love for God is love for God and God alone. But the love your neighbor as yourself is a less than subtle reminder that your neighbor matters as much to God as you do. We go through our life. Every one of us goes through our life with us at the center of it all. We have no other way to think about it. We see the world with our eyes. We stand where our own feet stand. We see, and the temptation in that is to think that really it does all revolve around me. And my neighbor's important, but not as important as I am. And I think the love for neighbor is a not so subtle reminder that from God's perspective, the neighbor is as important to God as we are. So we should love them as we love ourselves. It's probably a better answer to that, but that's what's jumping to my head right now. Yes?
What are we going to do about mean people?
What are you going to do about mean people? You got a list? So go back to where we started. The question, that's the who is my neighbor question. Who qualifies and who doesn't qualify. We can't fix all of that. The only life that you can be Christian with is yours, but you are the only person who can be Christian with your life. And so on that great getting up morning, Jesus is not going to ask you, why wasn't your neighbor Christian? The only thing that's going to matter is, were you Christian to your neighbor? That's all that's going to matter. And the good news about that is that somebody might be nice to you even when you're mean. You know? I mean, it really is less about making the world Christ-like. It's more like being Christ-like in the world. It is our being Christian with our own lives. Be Christian to your neighbor. If you do that, that's following Jesus. In my humble and accurate opinion. Yes.
Really appreciated all of your comments on humility. I think it's a great topic, and the way you handled that was beautiful. Your last analogy I had trouble resonating with, and I'm hoping you can help me work through that a little bit. So when you're talking about yourself as a youngster and the great Major League Baseball player, to me I heard more of inferiority. When you're sitting down in front of this guy, and I don't think your message is inferiority. So can you help me through that?
Thank you. Really important. Thank you. Yes, I didn't feel inferior. I felt I was in the presence of something. I mean, I was a ninth grader, right? I see this differently now. But as a ninth grader, I felt I was in the presence of something great. And it didn't make me feel inferior. It delighted me. It was a magical night. 2 days later, he took me to the stadium, and I got to run around the track at Fulton County Stadium with Hank Aaron. He was faster than I was, which surprised me actually. And so it wasn't that I felt less. It's I saw something wonderful in another. And I think that's an appropriate humility. I really appreciate the clarification because, my grandmother taught me that humility is about feeling less. Don't think too highly of yourself, son. Don't get too big for your britches. That's what she told me. And there are lots of folks who walk around, they're too big for their britches. But Christian humility, I think, is not ratcheting the thinking less. It's seeing the beautiful in everybody around you, the honor in everybody around you. And then when you do that, humility is just kind of the fruit that results. It just kind of results from it. Is that any clear?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you for clarifying.